get started. So first of all, I want to say welcome to everybody that's joining us and listening in today. My name's Liam Pietzka. I'm the Director of Brightbox Consulting. And for those of you who don't know, Brightbox Consulting are a digital, creative and technology recruitment business. We do a lot of work in the human-centered design space and working with communities there, which is why I wanted to run a webinar specifically around human-centered design, but more kind of pointed towards empathy and human connection, and how recent events, so COVID-19, has influenced human-centered design and design thinking, and how this could potentially change adoption in the future. So that's going to be the kind of general topic that we'll be discussing today. And I'm very pleased to have 4 human-centered design experts, esteemed faces within the community join us for this conversation today. I'll introduce each of you. If you want to just kind of maybe just raise your hand as I say your name, just so people know who you are. You probably won't need to do that, Steve, but you could do it anyway. We've got Steve Baty, who is the co-founder and principal of Meld Studios. And Meld are a human-centered design organization. They work with multiple clients across multiple sectors on anything from service design, business design, solutions. Thanks for joining us today, Steve.
Thanks, Liam.
Next, we have Sophie Tobin, who's the Chief Experience Officer of health tech organization, two-sided marketplace, Mable. Mable have been playing a big part in COVID-19 with some of the partnerships that you've gained and some of the work that you've been doing. And I'll let you talk about that in more detail as we move through there, Sophie, but thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Liam.
Dunya Lindsey, on to you. Dunya is the Head of Digital and Customer Experience for Wiise, an online accounting and operations software created by KPMG. And Dunya is also a KPMG Associate. Dunya, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Liam.
And then last but not least, Kylie Lewis. Kylie's the Head of Experience Design, Customer Transformation for Bupa, Insurance and Healthcare Organization. And for all 4 of you, thank you for joining the conversation. I'll kind of kick things off quite quickly. And I think it's fair to say that COVID-19 has been a very disruptive time for everybody on an individual level, as an employee of an organization, as a customer. I think about empathy and I think about human connection, and I kind of always pull it back to experience and what you're experiencing as an individual during a time of crisis. And what I'm quite keen to open up, and it's a bit of a loaded question because I think that all 4 of you could probably talk for quite some time on this. It's really around what your immediate observations have been and what you've noticed around knee-jerk reactions to COVID-19. So a lot of organizational response, a lot of people stood down, a lot of service-led organizations having to make quick decisions. So it's a big question. But Steve, we spoke about this in depth last week. So maybe what I'll do is open up with you and let you kind of tackle that first.
Thanks, Liam. Look, one of the most fascinating things that I've seen over the last, let's call it 2 months. So if you go from mid-March, I think it might have been the 17th of March, the Prime Minister gave a briefing at about 9 a.m. and said gatherings of over 100 people can no longer take place if they're indoors or if they're outdoors. It no longer matters. We're stopping that. And that effectively meant pubs had to close, restaurants had to close. We were hosting a conference the following day for 150 people. That had to shift. But I sort of marked that as the day that we really went into where we are. That was really the beginning of what we might consider this lockdown, where essentially a lot of businesses could no longer operate in the way that they are intended, and it's had a remarkable impact in terms of the way we work, what we value, the sorts of connections that we have, what it takes to make connections with other people. All of those things have had to adjust very, very quickly. And a lot of businesses have done that exceedingly well. They've acted decisively, They've put in place protocols for how they handle customers, no longer accepting cash, as an example, in a lot of retail and service type businesses. Cards only, contactless payments only, don't hand us your coins, don't hand us your notes. We don't want to, we're not going to do that. And that's been really remarkable to see. But I actually had I had a conversation this morning with the Sydney Cricket Ground. And I'm a member of the Sydney Cricket Ground, and I sent them a letter last night, or an email last night, in response to probably the third or fourth email marketing type message that I've received from the CEO of the trust or the membership group themselves. And they've been talking about things like the role the SCG played during World War I, and how we were a temporary hospital during the Spanish flu, and all of this kind of stuff. They've never once addressed the fact that we can't attend anything at the SCG. They haven't even sort of made mention of the fact that that's a major disruption to your membership. They haven't spoken at all about what they plan to put in place once events begin. They haven't spoken about what restrictions might be put in place around who can attend the ground and how many and what sort of seating there'll be, and none of it. So I got a little frustrated, and I sent a message to them last night and just went, listen, I don't care about the fact that, it's such and such's 80th birthday. You're avoiding the issue. Mm. And you've really got to do something about that. I got a phone call this morning. And the guy went, look, I get it. Thank you very much. We just don't know anything. We don't have answers to the questions that you are asking. Say that. Mm. Just at least acknowledge that that's a burning question, that that's going to be important, and handle that in your communications. Mm. But actually acknowledging that that's going to be an issue to people is an important one. And I think some businesses handle that really well. And I'm going to throw to Kylie, because I'm a member of Bupa, and I think they've handled it quite well. And I'll let her pick up on it for what they've been doing. But what I've been getting from the SCG has been anything but. It's been remarkably bad. Mm,
mm. Okay, well, Kylie, I think that's a good segue over to you there.
So, Steve, it's really interesting that you say that's when it started, because it was just so unclear at that point. Something we were really struggling with at Bupa is we were trying to work out, insurance works on a claims versus premiums and trying to balance that in the right way. And we were like, well, if everything's closed, then people aren't claiming, which, I think there was a lot of media coverage that we would be making these excessive profits because we'd be getting these premiums and no claims would be made. And so we kind of looked at that and said, how long do we think that this will happen for? And I think we made an assumption that it would be probably 6 months, that people wouldn't be able to get elective surgeries and they wouldn't be able to use their extras cover. And so we went, all right, well, let's make sure that we can build value for customers during this period. So although that they're not necessarily claiming for some of those big things, how can we build value while you're at home? And one of the big things that we identified was there seemed to be this uptick in people wanting to do, at-home workouts and all that kind of thing. So we partnered with 28 by Sam Wood, and we've given a subscription to all of our members for 28 by Sam Wood, and that has been it's been received really positively. The other thing we kind of recognised is that mental health was starting to play a big part in people's lives, either from job loss, personal connections. We were also talking about the connection between food and mood, and people's eating habits had changed, so we're getting a lot more takeaway. And so there was all these things that we started working out that we needed to really invest some of that money into supporting people with their mental health, because we didn't want to be just an insurer. We're not a transaction. We wanted to be that health and care partner. But interestingly, that assumption of around 6 months was really incorrect. So some of that money that we've actually spent on, hardship funds and supporting people is we've now.
Oh, I think we might have lost Kylie for a second. Just give her a quick chance to come back. Look, Sophie, I'll probably will just navigate the kind of same question onto you. And one thing that I kind of picked up that Steve mentioned that was, sorry, Kylie, we lost you for a second there, so I just kind of move that quickly over, is kind of the essence of transparency as well. I think that it's so important now for organizations to be transparent around what's happening internally, and that could be from an employee perspective. Steve and I spoke about there've been hundreds of thousands of people that have been stood down from different roles and things like that. And organizations have reacted very, very quickly and stood people down overnight, or they've been very transparent about what's happening at a business level, which has created a more of a level of respect internally and understanding on what's happening, the challenges that these organizations are going through. So what have you observed, and how important is transparency at a time like this?
I think transparency is very closely tied to trust and safety in a time like this, and something that to anchor back to the timelines of the various announcements and the greyness around those announcements, it was quite pronounced for us and our community. So Mable is a marketplace that connects people with aged care or disability needs with independent support workers. And we have a large, over 10,000 independent support workers on our platform. And by independent support workers, they are all sole traders and self-employed, and actually navigating the grey area of, as a sole trader, what does this mean for me? But secondly, I provide, as an independent support worker, in-home support for people that need that support. And so am I an essential service? Am I not an essential service? And the greyness that our community was sort of going through, and also as a client or a participant on our platform, do I still have access to support? What if I don't have friends and family around, and how will I access the support that I need? And this could be all types of support that we facilitate on our platform, from social support through to personal care. And so these questions were arising very quickly, both from I guess internally as a team, but also through extensions of social media, our customer support team, these questions were being raised. And so being able to create the right flow of comms and content out to both the clients and support workers was really important here. And that security and trust, or transparency and trust of, yes, you're an essential service. And when the borders were shut down between New South Wales and Queensland, we have a lot of people that seek support and provide support around that region. And if you're traveling across borders for essential work, that was fine. But how could an independent support worker actually prove that? And so we were getting feedback quite early on around this concern. So we were able to work pretty quickly on how could we provide a digital ID, for a lack of a better word, to actually prove that for a worker that they could show someone who that they were caring for that day, and that they're an essential support worker. So I think it is really critical or it's closely tied in this time of that transparency, trust, and safety.
Yeah. Thank you, Sophie. Dunya, I will move on to you, but we do have a question that is linked on to what Kylie said. And as an organisation, I think it's fair to say that you're not just an insurance company. You're a healthcare organisation. You're a care organisation, and you've mentioned the shift in focus has been around kind of mental health and things like that. We have a question. Your initiative to provide free subscription to the Health Workout Online for your members is awesome, but why do you think that other health funds have not been this proactive?
That's a really good question. I can't speak on behalf of them. I think that there's a few things. I know that we put together a task force very quickly, which I'm sure most companies did, a crisis management task force that was looking at how we could support customers during this time. So that was really fast. And we prioritised this above everything else. So all of the current work and projects that we're working on, everyone was funneled into this piece of work. So, or a couple of pieces of work, and this was one of them. So honestly, it's not something that we would have turned around this quickly in normal circumstances, but we had ultimate focus. I think also maybe there's the fact that we don't see ourselves as a health insurer and more of a health and care company, where we've got diversified interests. We've got, dental clinics and optical stores and aged care. So we've got this sort of holistic view of health, and it's not just insurance. So maybe that allowed us to look at it from a more holistic perspective rather than just, a transactional insurance perspective. And because we have had that focus on mental health, and we know that, food is very closely linked to mood as well as exercise. So that was something that we'd been focusing on for a while. And we did have a relationship with 28 by Sam Wood. It was a very minor relationship, but we did have a relationship. So it probably allowed us to accelerate that a little bit as well.
Thank you, Kylie. Dunya, I'm going to open the kind of question to you around transparency and observations in kind of quick reaction to COVID-19. Anything that you've specifically observed externally or even internally from a customer base?
Yeah, I guess we're in a slightly different position in that our business supports small and medium-sized businesses. And from our perspective, like Kylie and Bupa, we mobilised really quickly. So we put all of our campaigns on hold. We pivoted our teams across onto a kind of cohesive, cross-functional COVID team. And we realised that we had a bit of a black box. So I think that there's something in the varying reactions to COVID. So there's people that are, as individuals, they're reacting. There's people in Australia who are reacting to the Australian environment where we're on lockdown, and while we've had a tragic number of deaths, we haven't had the sheer horror or the scale of what we're seeing every night on the news. And then in the business world, economically, there's been so many different impacts. So we, mobilised really, really quickly. We decided we were going to, have this cross-functional group and use every single one of our touch points to deliver our message of really just listening to our customers. But we realised we actually didn't know what their reactions were. So it was really interesting. So all of our analytics stayed the same. There was no particular change that way. So we actually just rang our customers, and it was fascinating to talk to them, just to check in and say, how are you going? How are you surviving this? What's happening in your business? That we had such a range of reactions. We had customers in South Australia who were absolutely booming because suddenly they were supplying direct to consumer fresh produce, or aged care facilities who were really, really busy. But on the other hand, we had theatres that had shut down, and we'd had businesses that were servicing hospitality that had lost 3/4 of their staff. So it was a really interesting time to communicate with them. And what was quite interesting is that watched a lot of brands go straight into market with the We Care message, which was fascinating and really, 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 really encouraging and positive. But there was a weird moment where, and we participated in this as well, where it was a little bit twee. We all had our little cartoons with the social distancing, and then very quickly that tone shifted, because I think it became really, really kind of important and really, really scary for some people. So we had this kind of, we're all in it together, and we still are, but the tone shifted. So I think that the thing that's been fascinating for us is how you react to the different feelings of all of your different markets and your different consumers and the different experiences that people are having right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Dunya. Sophie, I'm just going to ask you a quick question because it's specific to the point that you made around the kind of digital ID. So we've got a question around that. Are you keeping the digital ID? Which will be the benefit for the future? Is this a speed up to digital transformation for you guys?
Absolutely. I think probably what we've seen across a number of, I'm sure what has been experienced across a number of organisations, those pieces or solutions or problems to be solved that were maybe on that second horizon, third horizon, there was a very clear opportunity to bring those forward and actually appropriate it for some of the pain points or challenges that were being seen through this time. And so we saw that across quite a few initiatives that we actually brought forward, even though we had it probably as later in the year, we'll look at that. And we were able to quickly scope some of these pieces to be more of a MVP or a skinnier slice, and how we actually prioritize this within the team in terms of resourcing. In terms of the ID in particular and what the role may be in the future, I think that's a great sort of design challenge or design question in itself. Is there a role that extends? Is this part of, oh gosh, I could brainstorm on this by itself now, but is this something that actually becomes part of your profile, or how you sign up, or how you're approved, or et cetera, et cetera? I guess there's a lot of questions, but what we were able to do with that one piece was solve a immediate concern or pain point and relieve a stress that was quite real for our support workers and also our clients. Will my support worker arrive because they're crossing a border?
Yeah. And Steve, and that's a good point that you made there, Sophie, just around, some of the short-term things that you're doing now, how it can influence things longer term for your customers. There's a huge emphasis on short term at the moment and these quick fixes, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, just around how the things that you're doing now can continue to help you build your brand from an organizational perspective. But Steve, I'll ask you as well, just, I know you work with multiple organizations from a design perspective, and I'm not sure if you've got kind of one example that you want to provide or speak more kind of generically, but what has been the immediate priority from a human-centered design perspective? Because lots of customers have been impacted in different ways. But what would you share there?
That's been one of the interesting things. You can see in Sophie's organisation, and you can see in Kylie's organisation and Dunya's organisation, that they're able to respond quite quickly in ways that are meaningful and significant for their customers, because they have always maintained this closeness with their customers. They, like we speak about empathy and that understanding. They're there all the time. So, Bupa has a fantastic record that goes back years of, trying to understand what their customers really need from them. Not thinking of themselves as a transactional health insurer, like we're there to process a claim and take your premium, but actually we're there to try and help you with your health and well-being broadly. And then what does that look like? So they're able to shift very quickly, and organisations like that are able to shift very quickly, deal with a crisis, but deal with it in a way that's not, well, how do we protect our business? How do we protect our profits? How do we protect our, like one of the most absurd things I saw coming out of corporate Australia and the Business Council of Australia was these discussions around, the importance of paying dividends. We need to protect our dividends, and dividends are important to our mum and pop investors, which is a great line that's always sort of brought out when large corporations are trying to, pay money, most of which goes to institutional and offshore investors. Like the notion that it's going to fund somebody's retirement as their direct income is a nice furphy. It represents actually a really small percentage of the population, and quite a small percentage of people actually rely on dividends direct from an organisation to fund their retirement. But it's a nice story. It's a much nicer story than, look, the institutional hedge funds from the US get upset with us if we cut our dividends, so we need to make sure that we protect that. And in order to protect that, we need to protect our profits, and that means we're going to have to cut costs. And in the face of a crisis, the best way that we can cut our costs is to reduce our staff. So, we're going to do that. That's not a good story. But there was this, rationalising and, hand-wringing that went on very early on around, well, we need to protect our profits and we need to protect our dividends because that's important to the economy as well. And it lacked any kind of empathy for their customers. It lacked any kind of insight into, well, if we close a bank branch, what does that mean for our small business customers who need to bank their daily take? And what is it we're prioritizing when we make our decisions? And the difference is quite stark. Organizations that really do care about their customers and really do care and prioritize the needs of their customers make a very different set of decisions than the ones who care about their shareholders and their profit and their bonuses. And in the middle of March, we got a wonderful series of case studies about what that looks like as people went through this process of making one set of choices or another.
I think there's some key points that you raised there. You know, planning communication, thinking about the message that you want to convey during a time like this, protecting your people as much as you can. And when I say people, I'm talking about employees and customers. And, you know, your reaction and how you communicate that is going to be a key part in how people perceive you long term. You know, Steve, we spoke about, and I'll go back to a kind of employee experience, but some organizations overnight, thousands of people are cut. No support put in place, you know, financial support, well-being support, healthcare support, all of those types of things. And then you see some organizations that have gone through the same thing. They've planned it, effectively communicated it, and they've let people go with a lot of support in place, you know. And it's not just about bottom line. You can protect your bottom line, but you can, you know, you can influence how you communicate that to protect your brand longer term.
Yeah, there's a question there around, well, you know, what is the point of generating profit if not to help you get through periods like this? But if all of your profit is being paid off to shareholders in the form of dividends, then there isn't any money left over. And that becomes, you know, problematic. At the Design Leadership Conference last week, we had a great talk early on in the day, and one of the lines that came from that, which still sticks with me, is the idea that profit is the fuel, not the purpose. So, you know, and when you think of it as, well, it's the fuel in the engine that allows us to do some other thing, then that other thing is the priority, not profit for its own sake. But we really are seeing, you know, organisations just go, oh, okay, it's not going to be possible to run at a profit, and we don't want to dip into our reserves, so we're just going to shut down, lay everybody off, and away we go. And then when we can make a profit again, then we'll start operating. But in the meantime, you've got tens of thousands of workers who are either laid off and now on unemployment benefits, and we had hundreds of thousands of people hitting Centrelink in those first couple of weeks. Or you've got, in the case of someone like Qantas, where they've furloughed staff, which means they're not out of work, so they don't qualify for benefits. And you don't have to pay them redundancies, but they're also not actually getting paid. So, you know, they're in this weird limbo where they're not up for the right sorts of forms of support. And again, like those are just decisions that have been made on a basis that doesn't feel like it's coming from a place of care for staff. And it's a tough one to then see them go, oh,
it is.
Yeah.
It is. Kylie, we've been asked another question, which I'm going to direct to you, and it's around human behaviour. Specifically, what longer-term human behaviours have changed that we have uncovered by being empathetic and understanding human connections?
I think some things that we've noticed is that there's been a shift, and I think it's, you know, it's early days, in convenience over experience. I think we were trying to create these really perfect, amazing experiences for customers and really understand all of their needs all the way through, but convenience has become higher priority than the pretty experience. I don't know if that will last, but I'm wondering if there's something in there that, you know, instead of creating this perfect digital experience or digital transaction, whether it's just the fact that I can just do it digitally, I'm happy with that for now, and you can iterate and make it better over time. I'm wondering if there's a shift there. I think that there's also, we just did some customer testing for messaging on customers that are falling into arrears, because we realised that this was a really sensitive time and we wanted to be careful about how we were going about having that conversation with people. So we just did some research, and I think just uncovering the differences in different customer types and profiles and different situations and circumstances, I feel like there's going to be more understanding of that through businesses. You know, we're all in this together from a macro level, but from a micro level, we're all experiencing this very differently. There's people that are working from home and they're very grateful they've got a job, but they're trying to homeschool children. There's people that don't know where their next paychecks coming from, really different circumstances. So I think that will be another theme, that we will start designing and understanding groups of people differently and not just a one size fits all. And I think the other thing is probably just the brands that do this, or the companies that do this well, I think will have a much better relationship with people. You always remember the crisis and who was there for you rather than who was there in the good times. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see. I think Steve just mentioned some of those companies that maybe haven't treated their employees, you know, quite as well as others. I think they'll stand out. You know, how you treat your people is equal to how you treat your customers, and that's how they'll be judged. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that shifts as well.
Dunya, I might kind of throw the same question over to you to see if there's anything that you can add. But then you also raised a good point about, you know, you're picking up the phone and having human conversations with customers and asking questions, which kind of brings me kind of into customer insights and the focus on the qualitative type of research that you can do in a short space of time. Has there been a shift for Wiise in terms of the need for that? Talk us through some of the thoughts around that piece.
Yeah, actually it ties into what Kylie was just discussing around that real shift from these amazing digital experiences to something that's a little rough and ready. And I think that's the biggest shift that we've seen. I think, you know, broadly, and then even within our business, I think the trade-off, people are happy with the trade-off, and they're seeing firsthand. You go down to the shop, you go down to your local pub, that you're not getting a beautiful, you know, 3-course pub meal anymore. You're getting someone who's running the pub, selling you their fresh produce. And I think people are really valuing the human connection in those interactions. So they're less transactional. They're not pretty, you know, they're lovely, but they're not necessarily pretty in terms of an experience, but they're authentic. And I think what we've seen as a business has been something similar. So first of all, you're absolutely right. Qualitative research has not necessarily increased. We always talk to our customer, but I think the value that our business and our, you know, masters put on it, it's much easier to make a case for qualitative research right now than it is for quant. Or it's much easier for them to respect qualitative research. Whereas you might, in previous days, you know, it's all anecdotal and, you know, where are the stats? Now it's like, well, actually, that's the core human connection that we're getting, and that's us having our ear on the ground and really feeling the tone. So from our perspective, yes, absolutely, we're shifting into a different era, and I think we've come out of the other side of Instagram, really. I think it's all about creating real connections with customers. And if that's a little bit rough around the edges, then I think customers value that as long as you have the best intentions. And I think being authentic about that is something that people will remember long after, whether they, you know, the button looked a little bit wonky. So yeah, that's my take on it.
And Sophie, I'll kind of throw that over to you, because we've spoken a lot about the qualitative side and gathering customer insights. There's been a big shift for Mable, you know, in terms of, if you look at the relationship between you and the Department of Health and what's been required as a result of that. I mean, and I know that you've tried to do a lot of that qualitative stuff. Has it been easy to kind of get those insights in such a short, defined space of time? Because, you know, the reality is we're looking at kind of 6 to 8 weeks. There's been a lot of work that's needed to be done to kind of respond to customers. How have you gone about that?
I think, well, Kylie said it so nicely, of convenience over experience. I think another piece is actually listen to learn, and making sure that actually everyone is pricked and listening to that conversation and sharing back, and how can we respond appropriately. And while from a product perspective, we were probably getting in a really nice rhythm with qualitative research, with you know, the design team only sort of just assembling around February of a few individuals, and qualitative research seen as starting to see as really valuable. Actually, in those first few weeks in March, we had a few things ready to line up for customer interviews, and making the decision of this isn't the right way to engage our customers right now. And actually talking about features and testing features probably isn't quite right. But how might we actually use our other touch points and other conversations with customers to gain this insight? So our customer support team having such rich insight and sort of on the phones talking to customers every day, and those insights being summarized of where were people's concerns, what was challenging in our process, how could we respond appropriately from there, and even dialing up those touch points as well to have those check-ins with customers and our customers, so both clients and workers and people in their greater network, but also our community engagement team reaching out to people in community and understanding where were their concerns, what were barriers at the moment, and particularly understanding this from I often say our platform or our marketplace isn't that complex, but the context in which we play is really complex. And so there's funding involved, there's sort of all the informal support networks that are involved in people, so family and friends, and the influence that has. Insight that we started to hear was from support workers. They would be lined up to deliver support or provide support, and then within a few hours beforehand saying, actually my family have said it's not a good idea and I don't want to provide support, I don't want to make anyone at risk, nor my family. And so there were a lot of shifts that it wasn't was real and it's emotional, and we had to really use our conversations to gather those insights and then respond appropriately from there.
Yeah. I think what I'm picking up is that talking to your customers and having human conversations, understanding that everyone is feeling something. And, you know, I can't remember whether it was Kylie or Dunya that when we spoke, you know, asking people just generally if they're okay at the moment is a question that we should be asking everybody. And I guess that's not just micro down to customers, it's to each other and people in similar situations, and, you know, it's small business owners when you walk into shops, you know, finding out what their struggles are. You know, there's a lot that can be said about having conversations with people. Steve, I'll kind of throw that over to you as well, just to focus on the kind of the short term and how you can go about kind of gathering customer insights and things like that. Is there anything that you would share there?
Look, as the others have been talking, I've been reminded of a number of conversations that I've had with businesses this week. So not my clients, but effectively my suppliers. And it's interesting to pick up the difference in tone between what Sophie was just describing about her outreach to the community and to their providers and the sorts of conversations that they're having versus some of the ones that I've been having this week. And some of the ones I've been having this week are essentially, hi, how are you doing? Is there something I can sell you? And, you know, like it really, there really hasn't been any interest in the answer to the question, how are you doing? That really wasn't. That was just a polite way to, you know, get the conversation started before I ask whether or not I can actually sell you something. It's uncommon for an organisation and for the people in that organisation to simply reach out and go, how are you? Just that. Just how are you? How can I help you? Is another question that you don't hear often enough. I mean, all of the conversations that I've had this week could easily have been entirely different if they had approached it from the point of view of, look, we're seeing these things in organisations such as yours. We're seeing people try these strategies or put in place these measures. Have you tried that? Would you like help in trying that? I've gone from having 2 studios, for example, you know, with technology set up in both of those locations and suppliers coming to both of those locations, And in the space of no time at all, I now have 20 studios effectively, because everyone's working remotely. So I now have, quite a distributed environment that I need to manage. But for example, Telstra hasn't said to me, listen, you're not using your internet connection in your studios at all at the moment, but everyone's at home. Do you want to cover their home internet instead? Give us the names and addresses of your staff, and if they're one of our customers, we can put them on that deal and just take it off the other thing for the next 2 months or 3 months or whatever it might be. Like, there's been no thinking along any of those sorts of lines. But the difference when you simply reach out to somebody and say, look, we know that it can be difficult right now. We're going through that difficult time ourselves. How are you, Len? How are you coping at the moment during this circumstance? How are you doing? Sophie, this must be stressful for you, having to try and... How about you, Dunya? How's this... you're dealing with people, all of whom need your help right now, making sense of a complex set of regulatory changes. They want the benefits that they can get from the government. How's that? Like, those sorts of conversations are far more valuable. And you learn a lot, as Sophie said, if you listen to learn rather than listen to respond, listen to sell. That makes a world of difference in terms of how we're engaging with people. But if I come back to the question that you asked the others around sort of some of these longer term impacts that we might be seeing, and those conversations that we're having in the short term, and how we're engaging with people and making connections in an environment where we can't get together face to face, and we can't sort of sit down in a room at a table together and have a conversation. One of the big questions for me is the role of touch in establishing and maintaining human connection. And we do it all the time without necessarily realising it. And we're suddenly faced with this world where we're not allowed to touch other people. But I think we're also going to come out of this and be very, very conscious about our proximity to and our interactions with strangers. So we talked earlier about cash and handing over cash or accepting cash from a stranger. Don't know. Where's that money been? How have you treated it? I didn't see you spray it down after you received it. It's been in a till with all, like, that kind of stuff will be really interesting. When we were running our conference a couple of months ago, we had a big conversation with a hotel around how we would handle the lunchtime service. So normally at a conference, you've got 150 people, you come out of a session, there's a buffet style, everyone picks up a utensil, serves their food, puts the utensil back down, the next person picks up the utensil. Suddenly I've got 150 people handling the same ladle. No way, like, I can't. Well, we're not going to go back to that. I'm going to walk into a buffet environment, and I'm going to be looking at things like, shared utensils with a great deal of suspicion. And I think we're all going to deal with that and have to deal with that in different ways. How we handle branch environments as service environments. I've heard reports of people, like in cafes and restaurants, removing things like salt and pepper shakers. So, because people aren't going to touch them anyway, and they need some way to serve those things, so they're going to, like individual packets of things. For that very reason, because that interaction, that touch interaction, is now going to be viewed with suspicion.
Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting thing. That's going to ripple through a whole area of services in particular. Would you use an ATM right now? Would you go and use an ATM right now, or would you wipe it down first if you could?
Probably wipe it.
Yeah, like
or use my sleeve to press the buttons, maybe.
Yeah, like maybe. But like we're going to be immediately suspicious of those sorts of interactions, and organisations are going to have to do something to address that design element if we're going to continue to operate. But because it's not going away, and that suspicion's not going to go away, we've actually been hammering it into people constantly for the last 3 months, and it's not going to change in a hurry.
Yeah. So Joe has, it's an interesting statement, and it's a question that I have, but he's probably framed it a little bit better than I have. So I'm going to ask this specific question because I think it's an important point to make. The comment is that it's interesting how everyone's talking about authenticity, transparency, and understanding customers are humans. That's been a theme for a long time with COVID-19, and one that some organizations weren't doing for a while. Has there been any shift from organizations who didn't get that before COVID and have changed their position after it? And will it make will COVID make more organizations more human, these organizations more human? Kylie, why don't I throw that one over to you?
It's a very good question. I think one of the biggest things that COVID's done is it's leveled us all. You know, we are all experiencing something with COVID. So I think the difference that HCD and that sort of, you know, understanding the human you're designing for and all that sort of stuff, it felt like a little bit other, that I need to understand this other person so that, you know, I can understand what they want. And I think now we're like, well, you can always put yourself in that position in most ways, is that we're all experiencing something. And so you can very easily, you know, we're all selfish human beings, right? You kind of need to relate to that on that level. So I wonder if that's got something to do with it, is that we know that, you know, we are experiencing it with them. I also think it shows because, again, on a macro level, we're all experiencing this. On a micro level, it's all very different, is that we've noticed a lot of assumptions have been busted. So one of the things I've noticed through through some of the insights we've been getting and testing some of the wording that we've been looking at, or some of the programs and initiatives, is that what we're seeing really polarizing results is that for one group, it's like, yep, we really love this. For another group, they're like, I don't care about 28 by Sam, just give me the money, right? And then there's other people that really do appreciate it. So there's this real shift in, you know, assuming things and being proven wrong because people are feeling so different about it. So I wonder if that's got something to do with it. Will it stick? I think is part of the question. I think so in some ways. I think someone else said earlier is that it's given the type of work that we do a lot more validation, in the sense of, you know, it's really been able to identify whether something is going to resonate or not, or the way that we position something can have a huge impact on how people perceive the brand or the company as a whole. So I think that there's definitely been an observation that it's given us a bit more of a valid platform to talk to. But I think on a practical level too, is that it's become a little bit easier. I don't know about you guys, but one thing, we did a whole bunch of research last week, and I found it almost better in some ways, in the sense of, it's probably similar in the same way as, you know, working remotely, is that we've got, you know, customers are at home, we're at home, we've got kids in the background. So you get this really human connection before you've even started. They haven't had to walk past all the clinical corporate signage and sat down and say, oh, I love Bupa, I love everything about it. We're all connecting on this really human level, and we've all got this level playing field of, you know, how are you going? How are you coping through this? You know, it's really tough, isn't it? And we're able to have that conversation that gives us this immediate connection. And so I've found some really amazing insights through these last few weeks of doing customer research. So even on a practical level, I feel like it's become easier and more connected, and it doesn't feel like this big corporate business, you know, doing customer research, which it felt very us and them, and it felt much more cohesive and authentic and transparent and all of those lovely words. But yeah, I found it easier to have that connection with customers. So I'm wondering if that will stick too. I hope so.
Dunya, I'm gonna throw the same question over to you. Do you feel like there's going to be a lot more adoption on kind of human-centered design practices within organizations that probably weren't focusing on that piece enough, talking to their customers, having those human interactions? Do you feel like this is this is going to change the way that organizations operate forever, recent events?
I'm possibly a little bit more cynical than Kylie, although I do agree with a lot of her points. I think this is an incredible litmus test to the validity of UX and human-centered design. And we have it's a very clear relationship at the moment. You do X, and then the reaction is Y, which makes it very easy for senior stakeholders to see the effects and therefore to see the validity of it. I do think that, like in every instance, I think, authenticity isn't just a word. I think Steve, similar to what Steve was talking about earlier, I think it goes to the heart of the values of the organisation. I don't necessarily think you can put on a empathy cloak and then immediately become empathetic. I think that's something you need to live and breathe. And it goes to how you treat your own employees. It goes to your connections within your networks. And I do think that the companies that learn that lesson now, yes, I think that it'll stick with them. But I do think that there are probably people that are a little bit more practical or, short term, and they think, okay, well, we'll just take on these tactics for the short term, make sure we don't get into trouble with PR, and then the crisis ends, that they'll go back to BAU. I hate to be that cynical, apologies, but I'm hoping that is a small percentage. But I do think the companies that get it, they really get it right now.
And Sophie, what are your thoughts there?
I've sort of got 3 points trying to connect various things that were mentioned. And I guess in relation to organisations, I've got quite I can't help but share a very localised and personal view on that. I grew up in regional Queensland and sort of a small country town, and I think within the first month or two of more restricted view, sort of sharing with my partner, like, I feel like everyone now knows me in the street. Everyone wants to have a chat, local cafes want to talk, and everything has become a lot more local. And so those connections are quite real now, where I think in a big city you can go a little bit anonymous and then not necessarily have those touch points at the local cafe if you don't want to engage in that, the pub, etc. So I think there's this interesting thing around being local and also having conversations with neighbours and pieces that probably hasn't happened so much. So that's probably more at a society and community level. And then I think in relation to what Kylie mentioned in relation to research, we had a really similar experience in the last few weeks as well. I remember the team slacking me immediately, being like, everyone showed up and there were really good interviews and there were no problems with Zoom. And and why we were reluctant in the beginning weeks of sort of more restricted views is like people were really busy. There was a lot of change, but now probably as everyone becomes a little bit more comfortable in the new, how does interactions that businesses do have with customers, such as customer research, become more integrated? I think it will be interesting to see what elements of that do stay versus not, and I don't know, but. Or we can try and recreate it in some way. I'm not too sure. It's probably an interesting design problem in itself. But yeah, that has been quite real in terms of people sort of readjusting to what life is at the moment.
We've actually got 6 minutes left. Can you believe it? That's gone so quickly. I should have been keeping my eye on the time a little bit more because I have a couple more questions. I'm not going to get to them, but I will ask a couple of questions that have been asked by some of the participants today. So Kylie, there's one directed at you. Do you think that customer research improvements is due to people getting more familiar to the digital? Which aspects in the future will stay remote and which face-to-face? Regarding research?
It's a great question. My team and I had a couple of hours session on Mural yesterday on what have we found is working with remote research versus face-to-face, and what will we keep and what will we continue to do face-to-face versus remote. it was really interesting. There's certainly something to be said that I think when people are in their own home or own environment, the difference that and their level of comfort and the fact that they haven't walked past all that signage, and you do have that sense of a level playing field and real connection. So we're wondering, how do we recreate that, either remotely or, where can we go that's somewhere a bit more mutual? So there's something there that we'll probably look at. As far as the doing it remotely, I actually don't know if there was anything that we lost from. I mean, there's always that human being able to see, people's reactions from a whole body perspective versus, online. But I think unless it's something where we really need to understand the whole human experience and how they move through something, we would probably continue to do a lot of our research online. I think it'll be a case-by-case basis. I don't think we'd say all of it, but I reckon we might move to at least half, if not more, being remote. And then we'd probably sort of see, depending on what we're testing and what we need to understand, we might do some things still face-to-face. But yeah, I'm all for it at the moment, but that could change. I'm hoping, I think Sophie mentioned that, I wonder how much of this we can recreate to keep some of that human connection there, but we'll have to see. We'll play it by ear, but yeah, at the moment we'll continue doing a lot more online than we used to.
So as we kind of wrap up, I might just kind of throw it out there and just throw a quick question over to you, Steve, just in terms, I mean, there's been lots of points that have been raised in terms of what we could be doing from a human-centered design approach, the conversations that we can be having, the questions we should be asking in the short term that can help strengthen the long term. Is there anything else, any other kind of, hints and tips, anything kind of takeaway that you can provide for people kind of listening in at the moment?
The one thing that I would advocate for is that we have an opportunity at the moment to ask questions that are a little broader and are a little more focused on what type of society do we want? What type of country do we want? We're about to invest, and we're in the process of investing an awful lot of money to assist with economic recovery. That economic recovery and that stimulus money can be used in any number of ways. But wouldn't it be nicer if it was being used in ways that get us closer towards the type of country that we want for ourselves, and the type of society that we want for ourselves, and the type of communities that we want for ourselves? If we're going to spend it on infrastructure, wouldn't it be nice to understand, well, what types of infrastructure do people want? What type of community do people want? What type of, economic footing do we want? And let's invest towards those things rather than investing in the old things by default. So whilst we're having connections and we're thinking about, people's needs, we have that opportunity, I think, as designers, as human-centered designers in particular, with a view for what people want out of life, to be directing some of that conversation towards, well, what type of society is it that we're after? If we're going to spend $150, $200 billion on infrastructure spending to stimulate the economy, maybe we spend it on cycleways and running tracks instead of on highways and freeways. Maybe we spend that money on renewable energy instead of propping up coal and coal-fired power stations. Like, those are simple choices. And whilst in each case we end up with transport, or we end up with energy, we end up with the right type of transport infrastructure and the right type of energy infrastructure. If we take the time to actually say, well, what is it people are looking for?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and quite topical with Gladys's recent announcement of more cycleways across Sydney. Look, guys, we have pretty much run out of time, and I think we could have probably spoken for another half an hour, which was always going to be my concern. But but anyway, I think we covered some really good ground, and I appreciate all of your insights and stories. And I hope that everybody listening has kind of taken some key things away from the conversation. So thank you all, first of all. The next thing, just to let everybody know as well that there will be a recording available. I'll get that out tomorrow. So anyone that kind of joined a little bit later, I mean, anyone that RSVP'd will get a copy of the recording. If you have any questions that maybe you wanted to ask to anyone in particular, look, I'm sure Dunya, Steve, Kylie, Sophie would be happy to answer a question via LinkedIn, or, you know, if via social media channels. So make sure you kind of reach out to them if there's anything specific. But again, I just want to thank you all for your time. And thank you everybody for joining. So
Thanks
take care.
for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye,
All right.
everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.